Don't bark, Jack. About to do the live stream. Hello, everyone. It is time for our weekly live stream. And every Saturday around 2:08 p.m. Central Time, I do a topic and I discuss things that have to do with reef keeping to help you be more successful with your aquariums. Now, I went through the list of live streams we've done. Actually, I went through the last 60 to see what all we've discussed. We hadn't talked about Protien Skimmers specifically in a while. We always touch on things after the topic when we answer the question and answer period, which is when I ask you questions, or you ask me questions and I answer them. And I ask you to ask me questions. That's what I'm trying to say. So let us see if we've got everything working here properly. So far, yep, there's someone says audio is good. Thank you very much. Nope, Reef with me, you are actually second. Hello. All right, so Protien Skimmers, I feel, are like the most important safety net when it comes to reef keeping. And I've been recommending people run a Protien Skimmer on any aquarium they have. Does it mean you have to? No, you can do it without, okay? I just want to get that out of the way. There are people out there that run successful aquariums with no skimmer, nothing on it, just a box of water, and they change water. And that's it. But I'm more about keeping a reef with mixed corals, with clams, with anemones, with the hard corals, the soft corals. I'm talking about the whole shebang. And I want fish in there, and so I want to skim the water to make sure that the water stays clean and healthy for the longest amount of time possible between those water changes. So if you have a Protien Skimmer, it can actually rescue your tank when things go wrong, when things get into the system that don't belong. It's not an absolute 100% bulletproof safety net, but it's definitely a better net than having nothing at all. So I do recommend that you have one. Back in the old days, people would tell you to get one that was double the size rated for your aquarium. And I think we've gotten away from that. I feel like the manufacturers have gotten better at saying this size skimmer will support this size amount of livestock to handle the bioload that is coming out of these fish that you have, and even some corals. And so we want to make sure that we have something adequate enough to pull out the dissolved organic compounds, or DOCs. Now, I like Protien Skimmers that are in the sump, where I feel like they belong there. It is possible to run a tank with a skimmer hanging off the back, and I've done that in the past as well. I did it on my 29-gallon for a couple of years, and I did it on another 29-gallon in my son's room. He had a little tiny skimmer on the back of his as well. But ideally, having a nice, powerful Protien Skimmer down in the sump is your best bet, because number one, it's out of sight, it's not an eyesore. And secondarily, it can do its job, hopefully quietly. Now, there are certain brands of skimmers that are louder than others. And I have used, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 different skimmers in my career of being a reef keeping hobbyist. And the one that I've been using most recently, and actually for the last few years, is Nios. Because I find that the Nios Protien Skimmer is absolutely quiet. And I mean, yes, if you unplug it, can you tell that it's gone? Yep, it's one less microsound, but it is so quiet that I love running it. I had a Euro Reef Protien Skimmer that I ran for years. I've run Reef Octopus, I've run Aqua Sea, two different types of that brand of skimmer. And you could always hear the rumbling, the injectors, the venturi that was sucking in the air. There was just these sound effects. And as more and more gear became more and more quiet, I found that even the Protien Skimmer had to be quieter for me to make me happy. So if you have an aquarium that's in your bedroom and you want to be able to sleep at night, you want to have equipment that's pretty quiet so you don't have anything bothering you. Now, the low hum of equipment is normal. We can't completely isolate it down to nothing, but if your system is running quietly, you should sleep better. Your spouse shouldn't be upset with you for having an aquarium in the house. And you can enjoy movies and such without having to turn the volume all the way up to 100 to be able to hear what's going on because your reef tank is making such a racket in the same room. There are different types on the market, but what started off as a DIY hack has become the industry standard. And nowadays, I don't know that you can find a Protien Skimmer off the shelf that isn't using needle wheel injection. And so the needle wheel was, you had this impeller that was supposed to suck in air and mix it up and create foam in the body of the protein skimmer. And people were cutting that, and they were zip tying on some mesh material, which looked like a scrubby pad for cleaning dishes. And that worked really well, except the zip ties would break off and get sucked into the skimmer, and you'd have to disassemble. So every couple of months, you had to fix your DIY hack. And then later on, some brands came out with a better needle wheel impeller that would do the job. And it was just like, oh, this is so much better than what we had in the past. And I was really happy. When they started to make them professionally so that I could just buy one off the shelf and use it, I was totally fine with that. I was sick of trying to fix a protein skimmer that worked fine for a while, but now today I have to go deal with it. And for me, that's kind of the case with all my equipment. I really don't enjoy the tinkering and the fixing and the babysitting of equipment. I want to plug it in, I want to turn it on, I don't want it to do its job. And when it comes to protein skimmers, the Nios does that right out of the box. Now, I did have a customer call me up today, and he said that he has a Red Sea setup, and the protein skimmer is sitting in 8 inches of water, but his protein skimmer continues to overflow, even though it's been running for a while. And so he was saying, I need a skimmer stand, and I agree. A skimmer stand is just something to lift the skimmer up a little bit higher inside the body of water in your sump to not submerge the skimmer as much. So if your skimmer is standing in this much water, and the skimmer keeps overflowing and you've adjusted it to its lowest point, by lifting the skimmer up to this point in the water, it'll make a big difference. Just that 2-inch difference can change everything and make a protein skimmer completely behave. Now, if you are running a protein skimmer, and I just want to drop in some hints because there's so many things about skimmers that come to mind. If you're running a protein skimmer that works perfectly fine, but then suddenly now is misbehaving and just overflows and won't stop doing it, sometimes the simplest solution is to grab something like a Ziploc or a Rubbermaid container that you get lunch meat in, and just take that thing and put it under the protein skimmer to lift it up 2 or 3 inches, and then see if it will settle down. And that a lot of times does exactly what you hoped it would do. It would make it quit overflowing into the cup and wasting a bunch of what looks like totally normal water. Now, by wasting, if you were to take that cup and keep dumping it out, it would seem like you're throwing away salt water. It doesn't look like it's dirty. It doesn't look like it's full of anything. So if you have the protein skimmer just overflowing and coming out of the cup and pouring back down into the sump, there's no waste, but it's making a big mess. There's bubbles and there's spatter everywhere. So by elevating the protein skimmer temporarily, while we kind of collect whatever the heck it is that's in the water column that's irritating the protein skimmer, it can remove this condensed amount of something, and then you can throw away the skimmate in the cup, you can put it back into place, and then you may discover a day later, you can go ahead and put it right back into the sump the way it was before, and everything works perfectly as it always did. But if you are dealing with a protein skimmer that never runs right, you may need a little skimmer stand that fits underneath it. I make the acrylic skimmer stands for my customers all the time. I make them custom. I don't have any that are ready to go off of my website because everyone's protein skimmer is different, and there's just no point in me having 47 kinds sitting on the shelf hoping I sell one. So I just make them as needed on demand. And I basically need to know the length and the width of your protein skimmer, and then I'll make you the stand whatever height you like. The protein skimmer itself operates off of a pump or pumps that pushes into the body of the skimmer itself, and it's usually sucking in air on the intake of the pump itself. And so it sucks in that air, chops it up on the needle wheel like I described before, and then injects it into the body and creates this foam. And then usually you can adjust either a knob or you twist a pipe left or right, depending on the brands of skimmers out there, and you can go ahead and get the foam in the body to just about the right point. So where is that right point? I usually tell you if you have let's take my lovely coffee mug here, and let's just say that this is my collection cup and here is my protein skimmer, and all my foam is happening here. I like the foam to come to the bottom of the cup. And if you can keep it just boiling away or bubbling away right there, it will work its waste out into the cup and collect inside this skimmate collecting cup. If you have it too low in the body, you'll see that the neck gets really gunky and green and brown, and you're not collecting much skimmate at all. If the cup is filling up with a lot of watery skimmate all the time, the foam is too high up inside the cup. So, if you have it bubbling at this point, basically even with that line, you're already too close to the top of the cup. So I get it to the base of the collection cup, and that usually works out really, really well in 99% of cases. And then if you need to make an adjustment, you twist the knob to adjust the water level in the body of the skimmer. The water level is way down here. But as you raise the water up higher and higher, the foam will move up accordingly, and it'll get to the, like I said, the bottom of the cup is what I would recommend. If you are just starting a tank now, if you are a brand new hobbyist, or you just set up a tank this week and you're ready to start your Protien skimmer, don't. Don't even turn on the Protien skimmers for the first 4 weeks of running a new reef tank. You're basically going to go through this cycle, and that is where we go through the ammonia, nitrite, nitrate cycle. And as we're going through that, we don't want to skim out anything. We don't want it overflowing. We don't want it doing anything. Just don't turn it on because it's not necessary yet. It's too soon. It's just like you set up a brand new tank, you put water in the box, and you take 400 pictures and submit them to a magazine. They're not going to print them because there's nothing to look at yet. So we are the same principle. There's not anything that needs to be skimmed out of the tank yet, so there's no point turning it on. And some people will say, well, that's how you break into skimmers, let it run during the cycle. But skimmers don't need to break in. They might need a quick rinse if they're brand new out of the box, but as soon as you have them set up on a system that runs, that's full of life, the Protien skimmer will skim immediately. I've never had to break in a skimmer, ever. And like I said, I've used a bunch of different brands. There was one that I thought was really cool years ago. I think it was made by Red Sea. And it had a thing on the top of the cup that you could twist, and it would divert water from, I'm almost thinking of the name of it, but you could divert water from the base where all the magic was happening, and you would flush the cup. It would literally wash down the neck of the skimmer, and then you twist it back. And I was like, man, that is so convenient. And it was a fun little skimmer, and it did okay, but I didn't have a need for it. It was too small for my system, but I definitely liked playing with it. The perks of having the Protien skimmer I've already explained, but what about the accessories that you should hook up to it? One of the accessories that I highly recommend is a waste collector. And that would be a small container near the Protien skimmer that, as the stuff is bubbling up and collecting the cup, there's a tube that rises, or that lowers and drains down into the waste collector, and the waste collector then catches the dirty juice, which you can then throw away. But the benefit of a waste collector is that it's designed that when it's full, it turns your Protien skimmer off. There's a couple of ways of doing this. One method uses electricity, and basically you've plugged in your Protien skimmer into the waste collector apparatus, and when the waste collector senses that it's full, it stops the power to the pump on the Protien skimmer, and the skimmer turns off. Another kind that's been around for a long time uses a ping pong ball, and the ping pong ball is sitting inside the lid of the waste collector, and as the water rises in the cup, it lifts the ping pong ball up, which stops air from going down the line, which makes, and it would then stop the Protien skimmer from skimming, but that would require that the collection cup itself have no holes in the top. It needs to be sealed to where air can't move out, and the skimmer's kind of throttled to avoid making a mess. Now, if you don't have a waste collector, all you're going to have to deal with is occasionally when the skimmer goes a little crazy and turns into a volcano, you're going to have spatter everywhere to wipe off. You've got to wipe off the edge of your sump. You may have to wipe off the ceiling of your cabinetry. You may have to wipe off tubing, and maybe there's some electrical wires or outlets. I mean, who knows what's down there? Whatever it is you've got there, if it's within 20 inches of the Protien skimmer, there's a good chance it's going to get hit with spatter and salt creep. So I would highly, highly recommend figuring out a way to set up a waste collector, because it is so much cleaner. You'll love it. And I remember when I set mine up, finally, I was at a frag swap, and there was a guy there, his name was Ben, and he had a waste collector for sale at his table. You know, we're buying frags, but there's sometimes people bring equipment. I'm like, oh my goodness, is this what I think it is? He goes, yeah. I said, well, how much is it? And he says, 25 bucks. And I thought, man, there's more money in the acrylic than he's asking. It's sold. I bought it instantly. And it came with that ping pong ball method. And there's even a spot on the top of it where you could unscrew a cap and you could put carbon in there and then put the cap on, and that would help absorb odor. But as soon as I got home, I modified it, and I put in a float switch, which I hooked up to the breakout box on my Apex controller. And when the liquid rises, it lifts the switch. The switch then contacts the breakout box. The breakout box talks to the controller. The controller says, turn off the pump to the skimmer. and I never have to wipe up spatter, and I love it. And I remember when I got that all set up, I thought, why didn't I do this 5 years ago? It's so wonderful. So I highly recommend, if you can figure out a way to squeeze in a waste collector near your protein skimmer, do it. And yes, you can DIY it, or you can get something like, I think Coral View sells something. I know that Avast Marine sells something called the Skimmate Locker, which I think goes to a 5-gallon bucket, but maybe you have other choices. Then I know Bash C makes some. I mean, I'm sure everyone makes them. And so you've got all these options of how to do it. But you want to figure out how it's going to work with your protein skimmer before you buy it. And your collection cup might not even have a hole in the bottom for liquid to drain out, which means you may have to drill the cup and install a fitting and run tubing. But it'll be so nice to handle that. Now, the only risk is that your waste collector's sensor may not activate. It goes bad at some point, and the waste collector just starts overflowing into your stand or onto your carpet. So, I mean, there's that. But other than that, I've found that it's worth its weight in gold. I've been using it for, I don't know, 10 years now, whenever I got it from Ben. And it's just my standard everyday thing. Matter of fact, last week, I got up and I was looking at the reef and I was looking down the sump, and the protein skimmer wasn't skimming like it should. Though my skimmer has 2 pumps. And so I have it where when the waste collector is full, it turns off 1 pump. Well, I'm looking at the waste collector and it's empty, but there's only 1 pump running. I thought, well, that's odd. So I went ahead and went into Fusion in my phone, and I went ahead and turned the skimmer pump on, and it turned on. And I saw the foam rising. And then I switched it back to auto, because that's how you do everything in Fusion. You never leave it in the on position. You set it to auto. That way, if there's a problem, it will take over and disable it. And so I put it to auto and immediately turned off. I thought, well, that is so strange. So I try it again. I turn it on. And then I switch it to auto, and it turns off. I'm like, ugh. So I go look at the waste collector again, because I'm thinking, what could be going on here? And that's when I realized the waste collector was full of clear liquid. So what had happened was the night before, I had put in Coral Vits, which is a bunch of vitamins from Prodibio. I put it in my Reef, and of course it made my protein skimmer go bonkers and overflow when it turned back on, even though it was a few hours later. And that's just something that happens. But I didn't think it was doing that. And so when I glanced down, it looked empty to me because the liquid was clear. But then when I realized it was full to the top, I was like, this makes so much more sense now. It's not, there's nothing wrong. My controller's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It turns out the protein skimmer so my floor stays dry. And it did its job, which was great. I dumped out the waste collector. I put the lid back on top. I put the hose back in there. Skimmer came right back on and started skimming. And guess what? It was overflowing quite a bit. And so I dumped out, I don't know, 5 gallons or so until the protein skimmer settled down. And problem solved. But that was kind of a nice little aside. Now, there's one more thing. Auto Aqua makes it, and who knows, maybe Hydros is making it too, because there seems to be some kind of a connection between those 2 companies now. They were selling Auto Aqua, but now I feel like Auto Aqua is making things and putting Hydros on the box. But anyway, there's a sensor. It's an optical sensor. You can literally hold on to the collection cup with a magnet, and then the other part plugs into the wall, and then you put your protein skimmer into that. And when the sensor notices that the collection cup is full of liquid, it will turn off the skimmer. So that's a $60 option, maybe a $70 option that would work if you have no room for a waste collector. It still would turn off the protein skimmer and avoid the spatter that's happening in your sump area to keep the cabinet dry and clean, and everything around the skimmer clean. So that one, I've talked about that thing at least 6 times on this channel, and I still have it brand new in the box because I've never actually set it up, but I bought it specifically for my skimmer that's on the frag system. So maybe I'll plug it in one day and use it. But I know what it's for, I just haven't done it. Dumb. Let's see. You want to clean your protein skimmer completely, top to bottom, once a year. And that would be actually taking it out of the sump, setting up in a vat of some kind of container, maybe a big Rubbermaid bin filled with water and vinegar, and just let it run for overnight if you want. If you want to use citric acid, If you want to use citric acid, you can. If you want to use muriatic acid, you can. Just know that these things, well, muriatic acid you have to be really careful with because it can burn you, it can get in your lungs, it can spatter your eyes. You want to be very careful not to harm yourself around this acid, but it will clean things in about 20 minutes. Vinegar will take all night. Citric acid might take all night. But those are the 3 different cleaning tools I've used over the years to clean my skimmers. I've never had any of them damage my skimmer. So, you know, don't fret when people start telling you don't use vinegar. Vinegar is a very normal cleaning solution that we use with aquariums forever. And there are some people that have said that some plastics are affected, but I haven't come across any that I own. I've cleaned cleaning magnets, skimmers, acrylic products, sumps, pumps, power heads. I've wiped it all down or soaked things, lock line, Durso standpipes, you name it. All those things have been inside vinegar for much too long and would become clean and yet didn't deteriorate or fall apart or fail on me. So I don't know. And that even includes things like gyres and vortex and Tunzi pumps. And I've put all those 3 through muriatic acid as well. So sometimes I'm in a hurry and I want to get something cleaned right now and I'll just zap it along really quickly. I do like the citric acid idea. It's not as dangerous to get rid of as muriatic acid. With muriatic acid, because it's so caustic, you actually need to dilute it with baking soda when you're done to get rid of the acid so you can pour it away somewhere safely, like down a toilet or, you know, in a corner of your yard, or even if you're going to pour it in the gutter, make sure you've completely broken it down before it, so it's no longer an acid. If you pour that out on concrete and it's foaming, you did not dilute it nearly enough. I see some of your questions are happening here, so I am going to scan them over for inspiration. But I want to continue talking about cleaning a skimmer. So when you take the whole skimmer, like I said, and you put it in your solution and you just plug it in and just let it run overnight or run 20 minutes or whatever you're doing, it will get every nook and cranny covered with your cleaning solution, and then you completely disassemble it. You take the screws out, you take the cone off, you take the intake pipe off, you look at the nozzle or the tubings, remove the tubing, clean the tubing. You want to make sure the venturi is completely clean, and that is the one area that so often does not get cleaned adequately. So get yourself in an area with really good light where you can look through that venturi pipe, because it's going to be a very small orifice, and you want to make sure that it's clear. And if you see white stuff in there, if you see any kind of calcification, that needs to be removed. And there's different ways of doing it. Yes, the soaking in vinegar or in acid will help, but what I found to be the simplest solution is to take a drill bit in my hand, just the drill bit, and put it, and you'll get the right size that matches my orifice of that venturi nozzle, and I put it in, I just kind of twist it back and forth, and it'll carve out all that calcification until it's just down to clean plastic again, and then I put it back together, and you know, I'm done. But you know, I've tried toothpicks, dental tools, scrubby brushes, pipe brushes, but the drill bit works the best. And it won't do any harm to the plastic because it is the same size hole. Now, if you went one size up, you're going to start carving away some of the plastic. So don't do that. But it works really, really well. The pump itself should be completely disassembled. Take off the impeller shroud, and then take out the impeller itself. Clean the magnet. Check inside the body. Make sure it's not cracked. Make sure the magnet isn't split. Make sure that the needle wheel apparatus on the end of the magnet is in good shape and not missing a bunch of pins. And if everything looks really good, put it back together, put the screws back in it, put it back inside the body of the skimmer or mount it on the side of the skimmer, put the whole skimmer back together again, and then go ahead and put it back into place and watch the magic. It will do its job. You'll be very, very happy. I prefer to run or clean my Protien skimmer when my tank doesn't need a skimmer for 2 or 3 days, which is when I typically run something like Red Cyano RX or ChemiClean. So while the tank is fermenting, killing off the cyanobacteria, I can just have the skimmer doing its thing outside in the weather, don't even care. And then I finally get out there with the garden hose and brushes and sponges and credit cards, and I scrape off any calcifications, and I just get it as clean as I can. And then I put it back into the sump. I also will clean out the area around where the skimmer normally sits, because usually there's sediment down there, and I vacuum all that out so it's gone. Now I have a nice clean zone. I put my nice newly cleaned Protien skimmer back into place. I open the knob as far as I can to lower the water level as much as I can in the body of the skimmer. And then I would turn it on after my water change, and it would still kind of overflow a lot because of the medication that I used to kill the cyanobacteria. But that is my preferred time, is to do it. If you're going to treat the tank anyway, great time to clean your skimmer. If you just want to clean the skimmer because it's June 1st, then just clean the skimmer. And what you can do if you're worried about forgetting how it all goes together is, as you're taking it apart, take pictures with your phone, and then you've got these pictures to review. Don't drop screws down the drain of your sink. These are certain things you want to do. There's also some little techniques that might help you make your pumps last longer. For example, the screw themselves, they should be stainless steel, and they should not be rusting. But if they are rusting, you can go get new stainless steel screws that are the exact same type at Home Depot or Lowe's or Ace Hardware, one of those places, and replace them. Now, one trick that is actually from the PC days, working on computers. When you would take something apart and you put in the screw back in, you usually strip the hole and it didn't hold as well anymore. So you put the screw into the hole and you put your screwdriver into that screw, and then you actually twist backwards until you feel a little tiny click. Now you're in the spot, and then as you tighten it, it won't make new threads and it'll just screw right back into the body. So real simple. Again, put the screw in the hole, put the screwdriver in the screw, twist backwards till you feel a tink, and then go ahead and start screwing it in. And you will have assembled your pump without damaging it and making it to where it's going to start falling apart because you've stripped out a hole. You can also put silicone grease on any new O-rings, any O-rings you just cleaned, to make them last longer. You can even put the silicone grease on the screws themselves and even on the metal, almost like a greasy coating to help protect it a little bit from the elements of salt water. The stuff won't wash away. It's completely reef safe, and you can make it easier to unscrew things later. Also, if there's any kind of fittings on your skimmer that require you to unscrew that are difficult, put the silicone grease on that, and this works with unions as well. I always do this. Any kind of union I put on my system, whether it's dry or it's submerged, I put silicone grease on the thread so I can unscrew it when it's time to take it apart. So that's a couple of tricks. And then something that you should do from time to time, and I don't think we talk about it nearly enough. Grab yourself a coffee mug, fill it up with some water. You can use RO water if you want. You can use tap water. I think RO water would be smarter. And I would use RO water because I have a spigot right on my sink. And put that in the microwave and get it nice and super hot. It doesn't have to be quite boiling, but it has to be enough that you can grab the handle, but there's steam coming off. And then go to your Protien skimmer and take the tube that goes to your venturi and stick it in the hot water and let it suck the hot water into the body of the Protien skimmer. And what that will do is it will clean out any salt that's in that venturi nozzle I was talking about before that you had to clean out the calcifications. And if you do this once a week, where you take the hot water and you let it siphon in, it'll kind of rinse that thing clean, and it'll probably never get clogged. But you have to remember to do it every single week. And it's something I've only done from time to time. This Nios hasn't had any problems at all. My Reef had problems all the time. So I was doing the hot water thing every week, and that made it last much longer before I had to take it apart and start cleaning out that venturi nozzle again. Okay, so let's see some of your questions here. Adam says he misses the Reef Diaries. They always got me in the mood to do tank maintenance. Any chance you'll be doing another marathon of Reef Diaries sometime this summer? Yeah, I might do it. I've told you guys, I feel like it's going to be repetitive of what I did last time because I did 130 days in a row where I showed you what I did with my tank each day. And I feel like you're going to hear me say the same things I said 130 days in a row. But, I might do it. I'd like to get everything situated first before I get to that stage. I've been working on the building, and today I put Kills primer on most of the exposed sheetrock. I have one area left to do, and then I have to do all the edges. And then I have to paint it, and then I can go to the next step. I ordered glass for those windows. I think you saw my post on Instagram. I've been debating this for at least a month of what to put in the window openings. I really wanted glass, but it seemed like glass was going to be hard to come by, so I thought, okay, I'll use acrylic. But I had such incredible doubts that the acrylic would not stand nice and straight, and I felt like it would just with gravity just kind of bulge or look kind of wavy. And I was planning to use 3/8, which is pretty thick, but I just had trust issues. I just felt like I'm gonna regret this decision. So I called a bunch of different glass companies and left phone numbers with everybody. And finally, a local one here in Fort Worth called me back, and they said, we can make you those pieces of glass, and it'll be $242 a piece, which was much better than some of the other companies that said $550 a piece, $620 a piece. And I said, 242, and like, yeah, so 525 including tax. And I said, done. So I called them yesterday because I was having doubts again. I'm like, did we get the right thickness? And they said, it's already done, it's been cut, it's ready. I'm like, oh. So I'm going to pick it up next Wednesday, hopefully get it home intact. A little bit nervous about that, but I hope I do a good job and get my 2 pieces of glass here safely. I'll use my suction cups, and I will take it out of the vehicle with the help of a friend and put them into their new openings, and I'll have my 2 windows that I wanted since the inception of what I was going to do with this building. So that's exciting. And then shelving has to go up, power has to be hooked up to the building, air conditioner has to be installed to the building, and then the build stations where I actually do all my work, I have to make those. And of course I have to get the Ethernet going out there so I can do streaming and so forth, and then start moving everything out there. And that'll allow me to declutter the house. And once I declutter the house, I can finish painting walls, replacing carpet, getting new furniture, and just making things a lot better. And getting all those kind of things squared away would make me feel a lot more content to do Reef Diaries, because I won't have these unfinished things all around me where it just plagues me every single day. Because then while I'm thinking about that, and it's time for another Reef Diary, and I got to spend time doing that. And it's just one of those things where I'd rather get these projects done and off my plate before I take on a daily thing like that. Rick says, do you use an automatic skimmer neck cleaner? How often do you recommend cleaning the neck? Actually, that was one of the things I did want to talk about. So I've been using the Vast Marine Skimmer Swabby since I discovered it. Whenever someone probably bought it and shared it, and I was like, oh my God, that thing's amazing. And I immediately went and bought one for my Reef and ran it for years. And then when I got my Nios, I contacted them and said I need a different type of squeegee. Everything else looks right. Believe it or not, the lid for my Reef fit my Nios perfectly, which was amazing. And so I went ahead and did that. And I run it I think I'm running it 4 times a day or 6 times a day for 2 minutes at a time. And it just cleans the inside of the neck. Now, if you are not running some kind of a swabby, some kind of a squeegee system that cleans the neck of your skimmer, then what you should do is you should take off the collection cup, and you should clean the riser inside the collection cup, and you should clean the neck of the Protien skimmer regularly. And when I say regularly, I mean frequently. I remember at one point with my Reef, I would take the collection cup off every single night, and I would go clean it in the sink and bring it back. And I did it every single day. And I never had to worry about the skimmer overflowing and sending a lot of waste back into the system. And I got myself an all-plastic toilet brush that I could use to clean the body of the skimmer. And I've had that thing 15 years. And I still use that toilet brush to this day to clean the inside of the Protien skimmer's body. You can use it inside the neck of the collection cup, depending on... And you can get different size brushes. If your skimmer's smaller, because your tank's not as big as mine, you can still find those ideal brushes that make it easier to clean things. And you can go ahead and do that. But if you can get some kind of an apparatus that cleans the neck of your skimmer frequently, that will make your life so much easier in the long haul. Now, the downside is when you take the lid off, you've got a wire that goes somewhere plugged into something. So you've got to unplug that and take that whole thing with you to the sink, make sure the cord doesn't get wet and the motor doesn't get wet. And then you got to clean off all the gunk that has amassed or congealed all over the squeegee's arm and the plastic and the inside of the lid. That'll all be covered up with gunk. And I usually use a credit card, and I just scrape all that off into this jello-looking stuff into my sink and flush it down the drain. But I love having the squeegee on my Protien skimmer so I don't have to clean it all the time. And so now I can clean the cup of my skimmer every 2 to 3 weeks because the neck is always clean, so it's always exporting all of what it's supposed to be exporting, and it's not lowering the efficiency. So think about this. They always talk about eating healthy, making yourself live longer, and they talk about your arteries, and they talk about plaque buildup. And they just say that, you know, as it gets more and more built up, the diameter of the artery in your body is thinner and less blood can travel through it, right? So you're supposed to take medication to avoid this plaque buildup. Well, with a protein skimmer, you've got a neck, let's just say it's this wide, like mine, okay? But if it gets covered with gunk, it's now this wide, or there might be a whole bunch up here, and you blocked off so much of the orifice, it's just not putting out as much waste as it could have. Does it mean it won't work? No, the skimmer will keep working. It just won't work as well. So by getting all that gunk out of there and scraping it out and removing it, your skimmer's running at peak efficiency all the time. So that's why I'm saying clean it regularly. If you want, you can take off the lid if you have the room and take your toilet brush and put it right through the neck and just clean the neck and plunge it down into the water a few times and clean the body and put the lid back on, because today you're not going to take the cup off and walk it over to the sink to wash it. That's totally fine. If you are in a situation to where it's building up a thicker gunk than the brush takes off easily, you can actually reach in there with your hand with a credit card and scrape it off. And what I would do then, I've done this in the past, I would scrape it off and I'd have all this gunk sitting on my credit card, and I would just scrape it off on the lid to make it drop into the cup, and I would just work my way around and put it in the cup and work my way around and put it in the cup. People are like, oh my God, you touched it with your hands. Yes, I touched it with my hands. And I went ahead and I got all the gunk out of there so that way my skimmer could be efficient and not be running. You know, if I'm plugging it in and I'm using electricity and it's supposed to do a certain job, but I let it get all clogged up with crap, I'm still using the same electricity. It still costs me just as much to run it, but it's not doing as good a job. Makes no sense. So we clean it so that it runs at peak efficiency. Bobby says, any chance you could start streaming 5 to 10 minutes before you start? I don't want to miss a minute. It'll be great to wait in the lobby before the stream starts. You know, that's kind of a thing. Matter of fact, I forgot to do my little intro today, but I have a 20-second thing that I did recently. I usually just drop into the stream and start talking because I have watched other streamers where they will stare at the camera or they're staring at the screen and they wait like 20 seconds or so before they start to speak. But if you were there from the beginning, you're like waiting for this person to do something, and I've never understood why they do that. So I hit start, I think it's going, I start talking, and I glance over here and hope that people are showing up. The whole waiting room thing, I don't know. I guess I could do a poll and we could see what the masses want. But for me, I've never understood making people wait. I hate waiting for anything. I just want to go do what I have to do and then get the heck out of there. But thank you for the suggestion. Let's see. The LFS informed me to get ChemiPure to fight this diatom outbreak by binding the silicates causing it. Sales tactic and leave it alone, or a good idea? You could try it. If it makes things better, great. I don't know that you're going to continue to see what you showed me yesterday. The little bit of diatoms I saw is actually a food for bacteria. But if it's really irritating you and you're like, I can't stand it, and you want to try this product, go ahead and try it. That's the one thing I've never done. I have sucked on the hose during a water change and got a mouthful of salt water, but I've never drank the Skimmate. Matthew says the Nios 160 doesn't come with a drain on it. You're right, and I have one that also doesn't have it. And I've been thinking about drilling it and then putting in a fitting in there so I can run a tube to a waste collector. But that's why I bought that Auto Aqua sensor to just turn off the skimmer. I haven't hooked it up. Andy says, I kept fresh water for many years, and I'm going to be settling up my first saltwater tank in the next few months, a 40-gallon breeder. Congratulations, welcome to the saltwater side. I bought a Dymax IQ skimmer that runs on limewood. Well, let us know how you like it. They use an airstone, which is correct. Are there any? Do you have any thoughts on power skimmers or protein skimmers that use airstones? That's another method that was used back in the past, and I know there's still some. Matter of fact, one of the tiniest little skimmers I believe is called Lee's skimmer, and uses an airstone, and it fits in the back of a very small aquarium, and it does an okay job. You just have to replace the airstone kind of frequently because they don't last forever in saltwater. They get clogged up. I remember, if you had a ceramic stone, you could scrub it with a toothbrush and it would kind of do a good job again. But the limestone, you almost had to take like a razor blade and scrape the surface to get down a layer to get it to operate again. But eventually it's just simpler, just put a new airstone in there from time to time. Thank you, Dave. That's the other one I wanted to talk about. He asked, can you explain DC-powered skimmers versus AC-powered skimmers? So AC-powered skimmers would just be a pump that plugs into an AC plug and it's on or it's off. DC pumps, on the other hand, can be variable speed, and so you can adjust the flow rate of the water going into the body of the skimmer. And so in situations where the Protien skimmer is overflowing badly, I would think you could really turn the DC pump down to a much lower flow rate to put a lot less water in the body of the skimmer, and that way it shouldn't allow the cup to overflow so badly when you're trying to remove things like ChemiClean or Red Cyano RX after a cyanobacteria treatment. So some people just arbitrarily pick a speed. For me, I would run it at 100% because all the pumps I have on Protien skimmers in the past just plugged in and were on, and they're at 100%. They're literally on, blowing as strong as they can, and then they're off when you turn them off. So I would have it at 100%. But then if you need to fine-tune things and you find that adjusting the gate valve where the water goes out doesn't work enough, it's still a problem with the skimmer overflowing, and the skimmer stand doesn't help with the skimmer overflowing, then slowing the pump down some would be another option. And another thing is that maybe later on down the road this pump fails and you need a new pump and you can't get this pump, but you can get one slightly larger that's DC. You could then turn that one down slightly if you can get it to fit onto the body of your Protien skimmer, and you can make that skimmer or that pump work. It would get you by. For example, I had the Reef skimmer, and it had man, that was so long ago. It had a certain type of pump. And like I said, I had modified the impellers with the mesh and the zip tie. And then later on, Reef came out with these Eheim pumps, the 1262s, and he came out with the nice impellers that were ready to go out of the box. And I switched to that, and I never regretted it. And I did buy an extra pump, and I bought a couple of extra impellers, so I always had them on hand, so if anything on my skimmer broke, I could just fix it immediately. But there are some brands out there. It could be a Deltec skimmer, or it could be a whatever brand. Sometimes the pump that was on there you can no longer get because that company went out of business, or the pumps themselves are no longer available for whatever reason. I know Dwayne had to get a certain type of pump for his skimmer, and he couldn't, so he had to get something different. And he found something that was relatively similar, but he had to make some modifications on the plumbing to make it hold on. And again, if it's DC powered, you can adjust to make it work with the body of the skimmer in case it's not a perfect match. There's a lot of people in here saying they use Nios. Brian says he'll give me $1,000 for a shot of Skimmate. If I had a signed contract from you that was notarized, I still wouldn't do it. Maximum Raids says, do you make your own skimmers? No, I don't. I don't make anything round. And I don't make square skimmers either. Mr. Berlin says I would use titanium screws, not stainless. All right. Winder Water says, I want to make the sump with a roller mat, refugium, and skimmer on my 50-gallon. Should I go with an oversized skimmer or a smaller one? Well, you're going to have a roller mat running on there. I would just get something that's rated for like 50 to 75 gallons, and I think that you'll be fine. But I wouldn't get something that's for like a 25-gallon tank. Glenn, I think you should contact Ecotech about that. He says the smaller Nios doesn't restart after they're turned off during a water change, for example. It's a complete pain. You have to lift them above the water level to get them restarted. I actually have the smallest one, and it always restarts. I do understand what you're describing, but I don't think that's normal. I think I've had mine 4 years. I've had to do what you described twice. I think there was something got into the intake of the impeller. But the rest of the time, I actually unplug it a lot because it's so much easier than going and opening the app, finding the skimmer, and moving the slider. I just rip the cord out of the wall, take the cup off, go wash it, put it back on, plug it in, it starts skimming immediately. And it's been doing that for years. So you may need a replacement pump. Adam says, what happened to the guys who quit on you midday? He's talking about the sheetrockers. Never heard from them again. I got a text from their boss who apologized and said he'd send someone else. And I told him, never mind. Lesson learned. I'm not going to do it. I don't even want to try someone different. And so I started doing the sheetrock work myself. And I guess that was last weekend, right? And so I worked on that. And then yeah, it's hard to believe it just happened. So anyway, I worked on it on Sunday. I started working on Monday, but I was really tired. And my elbow was really bothering me, and so I was trying to give it a break. And then my neighbor 2 houses up saw my post on Facebook and said, you need to talk to this guy. His name is Juan. So Juan came out, looked at everything, and said we can be back on Friday. I guess this is 2 weeks ago. He said we'll be back on Friday, and we will sheetrock it, and we'll tape and bed and texture, and we'll fix the problems this guy caused, and we'll make sure you're happy. I mean, that's kind of how I interpreted what he's saying. And I kept thinking, God, I hope this is a good guy. And on Friday, 3 people showed up, and by the end of the day, all of it was rocked. They did the whole thing, just like that. Remember the first crew? It's too difficult. These guys just did it, and they did a beautiful job. And, there was little tiny things that I was, again, like, I wish they'd fix that. They did. They fixed everything. They did everything. And then they came back Saturday, and then they came back again on Monday, and then they finally finished on Tuesday. And what they did was they put in all the tape on all the seams, but in the corners they had, or especially the 45s, they had this special type of metal, plastic edging that I had to go pick up in a place in North Fort Worth. And I gave them these strips, and they would fold them to make them a 45. You can use any angle you want, really. But they did it, and they put them in there, and it looks so good. And I watched this guy work. I'll tell you, this was a really cool thing. I wish I'd videoed it. So he has this metal pan. It's a long rectangular pan, and he has a scraper. I think there's a better name for that tool. And he would scrape some out of the mud, and he'd apply it on the wall. And sometimes he's doing this off of a ladder, off a stilt. Sometimes he's just standing on the ground. But what was interesting was he would take the pan, and as he's working the seam, he would throw the pan in the air so it would turn 180 degrees, and he'd catch it. So he'd have a clean edge, and then he would scrape his trowel off, and then he would go. And I just watched this guy do this repeatedly. He would just work the seam, and then he'd do his thing, and then he'd do the seam, and he'd flip the pan and catch it. I was like, I've never seen anyone do that, ever. And he did it a lot. And another thing that they did that I've not seen before, so when they applied all this mud on the ceiling, they then would, apply the tape, and then they use their scraper or their tool to scrape it away. And then whatever they took off the ceiling, they put in their pan. Then they'd come over, and they're standing on stilts, so they're 4 or 5 feet up in the air. And they would have a cardboard box, a small box of sheetrock mud came in, sitting on the ground. And they would take their little scraper, and they'd scoop some out, and they just sling that mud and hit the box. It didn't go everywhere. It went in the bucket, it went in the box every time. They almost never missed. And it was so fascinating. I mean, these guys have been doing this a long time. Juan has been doing it for 20 years. He had a 17-year-old working with him who was doing a really nice job. And I was thinking, man, he's really good for 17. So I said, how long have you been doing this? And he says, about 6 months. And I was like, you could tell. He'd learned a lot of tricks from Juan. So anyway, they worked their way around the windows. They worked their way around all the seams. There's these little cutouts and stuff. They did everything. And then they wrapped those metal things that bothered me. And so I have spent the last couple of days priming the walls. So I'll show you a couple of quick videos. Let's see. I'll just airdrop it to my... Let's grab this one and this one. So I'll show you a couple things. I think yesterday, okay. So you can see how I gotten all the walls done with the primer that's kills 2. And I'm using a wide lens so it doesn't, you're not too close to the subject. And then this was today. I got most of the ceiling done. I still have to do the upper area over that room, my little storage area. And I might need to buy more kills. All right, so that kind of gave you a little preview. And my plan is to go to Home Depot maybe tomorrow or Monday and get my paint and go ahead and do the window openings because that's where the glass is going to go. And I'd like to get that part done so that way when I show up with the glass, I can just unload it, walk it right in the building, put it right into its spot, put the trim in place, and that's done. I don't know, Matthew. He says, would UV cause a drop in pH? I don't see why. So I started running UV after I started getting some dinoflagellates in my tank. My pH was always 8.2 to 8.4, but after I started, the pH dropped to 8.0 to 8.1. So I don't know. That's a weird one. Oh, by the way, Protien Skimmers. Protien Skimmers remove waste from the water. But something else that they do that isn't mentioned on packaging is that they drive off CO2. So when you're running a Protien skimmer, you're pushing CO2 out of the water column of your aquarium, which helps the pH go up a little bit. So that's another good reason to have a Protien skimmer on your tank. CT says, how long after you see the first spots of coralline algae on the overflow plastic will the rocks get covered? What you can do is as coralline is starting to show up on glass or on plastic, on the overflow box, and you scrape it off, you send those little seeds into the water column. They can land elsewhere and hopefully start growing coralline on the rocks. But it'll take a while. It'll take some months. It could take a whole year. But it won't be rapid by any means. And then he also asks, what is your preferred alkalinity level on a LPS-dominated tank? Oh, I'd say probably between 8 and 9 DKH. Hey, did you guys see the news? Hanna came out with a new checker. He came out with 2 new ones. So I know many of you like the Hanna checkers and you use them for alkalinity and for phosphates, and now they have for nitrate. Well, they just released one for ammonia and for magnesium. So I don't know about you guys, but some people are really excited to see those. Canadian Reefer says, how do I get my wife to stop complaining about the skimmer smell? Well, what you could do is clean it more frequently, number one. You could also clean it when she's not in the room or not near the tank. You could possibly put carbon on top of the Protien skimmer, like literally create like a little fence and put granulated activated carbon on top. So as the air is blowing through the collection cup, it is passing through carbon so you wouldn't smell it. But really, cleaning the cup more frequently would be good. But the thing is, when you finally take the cup to the sink to clean it, it's going to smell bad. So you might want to light a match or light a candle or do it late at night, do it early in the morning, do it when your spouse is not around, so that way one less thing to argue about. There are just certain times you shouldn't clean it. Sage of Light says, what do you think about a dirty skimmer running better than a clean one? I read online that you need to break one in. I personally think this happens in a new tank due to low nutrients. A skimmer is a skimmer. The skimmer will do its job. As long as it's clean, it's going to do a good job. If it's dirty, filthy, disgusting, it's not going to do as good a job. I don't believe Protien skimmers need to break in at all. Alfredo says, any chance you could lose tiny creatures like copepods by using a Protien skimmer? Yes, you could lose some pods. It will take out whatever's in the water column. So if copepods get into the intake of the pump, if phytoplankton gets in there, anything that could be exported out. So for example, if you were going to dose something in your tank like vitamins or iodine or bacteria, Live Rock Enhance. These are different products that they actually tell you turn off the Protien skimmer for a specific duration so you don't remove it. If you're a person that is growing phytoplankton or just buying it off the shelf and putting it in your tank, you don't want to skim it out immediately. You want to let the phytoplankton stay in the water column long enough for the filter feeders to consume it, and then an hour and a half later, turn on your Protien skimmer again. There was also a gizmo that I made. I told this guy what I wanted. So he came to my house and we drew it on a piece of paper. And I said, all I want is a button I can push. So it'll stop my skimmer. And then after a certain duration, it'll just turn on again. And he says, okay, no problem. And he got this little tiny circuit board from I don't know where. And it had little things on there I don't understand. But I could turn a tiny screw to go between 5 and 45 minutes. And then I built a box that went around it out of acrylic. I cut out the holes for an outlet. I screwed it to the side of my cabinet. I put my skimmer pump plug into it, and I had a red button on top. And I could just press the button, and it would turn off my skimmer for 45 minutes, and I could add phytoplankton, I could add baby brine shrimp, I could put whatever I want in the tank, and the skimmer was off, but then it would turn on automatically. Because when I turned off the skimmer, invariably I'd forget. And it was the next day, I was like, oh, the skimmer hasn't been on in an entire day, or it hasn't been on all night. What was I thinking? How did I forget this again? So I made this little thing, and it made my life, easier. And I thought, oh, I'm going to sell these, and I never did. It was just too much work. But in the meantime, there are features like that in different controllers to where you can actually enable a type of feed mode where you can hit a button, and it's a certain duration. And it could be a physical button. It could be a switch inside Apex Fusion. I'm sure Hydros probably has some kind of feature like this as well. I know that there's feed modes in Mobius and EcoSmart Live, all these different ways of controlling our tank. So if you want, and you can set up your skimmer in a method where you need to turn it off temporarily, but forget to turn it back on, use one of those features to enable your skimmer to turn on automatically after a specific amount of time has passed. If you can't do that, or you don't have the equipment for it, set a timer on your watch or on your smartphone, and when your phone makes a noise, go over there and plug your skimmer back in. Brent says, how often do you clean your skimmer pump? Once a year minimum. Sometimes I do it twice a year. Trevor says, my first skimmer was a Cyclone. It's amazing how far they've come. I hated the Cyclone skimmers. They were horrible skimmers. There was only one slightly better, and that was the Skilter filter. But the Cyclones were so bad, and everyone was posting on DFW Mass about the skimmer and how it never worked right. And people complained about it all the time. And I got one with one of my tanks I bought used. And I did everything I could to make that thing work. And it just was garbage. And I was so mad that I had to pay electricity to run a little tiny pump that did nothing. I was just like, this is costing me like a nickel a month and I hate it. And I just wanted to run it over with my car and destroy it. And people kept trying to sell these stupid Cyclones to other hobbyists. And I just wanted to go buy them from everyone in the club and put them all out in the driveway and just run them all over and turn them into crumbled little pieces of plastic, just so that no one else would have these horrible things because they didn't work. Now, a few people said it worked. I disagree. A lot of people would modify it to make it a small caulk reactor. Maybe that would be okay, but as a protein skimmer, it was terrible. And I just couldn't stand that this thing existed, and I wanted to do everything in my power to make sure it never existed ever again. I never actually broke any, but it's all I wanted to do. Rick says, what are your thoughts on recirculating skimmer to reduce CO2 and increase pH? I don't have an opinion on that one. I've never run a recirculating skimmer, so I have no insight whatsoever. Winderwater says, do you always have to fully open the gate valve on the main drain after a pump shut off on the bean animal style overflow because the water level is too low and it's making noise? You shouldn't have to touch that thing ever, and then occasionally make slight adjustments on the gate valve to get it quiet. So if you turn off your return pump and then you turn your pump back on, initially it will be a little noisy, but then the water level will get back to its normal level inside the box and it'll be quiet again. But you shouldn't be changing that valve just because the pump was off. It should go right back to the way it was operating. The only reason that you might have a problem where you have to actually mess with the valve is if something has got in there that's obstructing it. Small fish, snail shell, cucumber, calcification. That's when we have to actually adjust them. But I have 2 gate valves on my system right now. And every single night I turn off my return pump. And then 10 minutes later, it turns back on. And it's noisy for, I don't know, 3 minutes or so while it's kind of equalizing. And then all the drains operate back to their normal self. And I haven't touched those 2 drains in months. I'm looking for the next question. Okay, let me try this one. Born to be a shooter, Josh says, will a huge dino bloom, is it dinos, starve out my snails? Been going on for about a week and starting to worry they're not getting any food. Boy, these things make you worry. I'm worried about my BTA getting enough light. So many things are happening in that little paragraph. Number 1, are they diatoms? Are they dinoflagellates? What's happening? Now, dinoflagellates are toxic to snails, and the snails will avoid it or they'll die from it. So we don't want them anywhere near that. If you have diatoms, that is a type of food for bacteria, so you don't have to worry about that. If it is cyanobacteria, the snails don't care. So there's 3 different things that could possibly be on your sand bed. Those are the common 3 that we tend to see, and diatoms dissipate on their own. Cyanobacteria you have to treat. Dinoflagellates, it's a whole battle. So hopefully you don't have dinoflagellates, but you can definitely go to Google and you can type in dinoflagellates and you can see all the pictures and find all kinds of discussions. There's groups on Facebook dedicated to helping people beat dinoflagellates. Your snails would be eating food off the glass or off the rock or possibly off the sand bed. But if you have dinoflagellates, odds are some of your snails are going to die, which as they die, they're going to add more crap in the water that the dinoflagellates will use as fuel to get even more established in your tank. So that's not good. Now, you also said you're worried your bubble tip is not getting enough light. Well, I don't know what's going on with your light or where your bubble tip is, but you want to make sure that your light fixture is designed to keep reef corals and invertebrates alive. So I don't know what light fixture you have. You'd have to tell us. And then finally, if you are thinking there's just not enough food in the tank for some reason, you can always put in a little bit of food, whether it's flake food, pellet food, frozen food that's been thawed out. A small amount of nori clipped to the glass or rubber banded to a rock down on the substrate. These are all things you can do. Maximum Raid says, I bought an aquarium last weekend and a dozen fish and some corals and everything is dead. Starting over with more tomorrow. Okay, so I'm sorry everything died. You bought a used setup. I guess the transfer didn't go well getting it to your home. What you want to do is, as you're setting it up again, you want to put it through a real cycle. If everything died, you have plenty of ammonia. So you can just let the cycle continue. No Protien Skimmer, no refugium right now. Don't even turn on the lights because all you're going to do is grow algae. You don't need that. And then in about 3 to 4 weeks, you could try a fish and see how that does. And if that does well for a week or two, then you can start looking at getting more fish, and then you can start looking at getting some frags. At that point, you'd be turning on your lights, you'd be turning on your Protien Skimmer. I know I'd wait 3 or 4 months before you put in any plants in the refugium because the tank is so new. I actually have a video on this channel called the Reef Timeline, and I highly recommend you watch that video. It's a really good one that kind of tells you what to expect during the first 24 months of running a reef tank. Mike says that the VCA water flow generator that he got from me is working great. I'm glad. I have 2 of them on my tank, and I take them apart and clean them from time to time, once a year. Other than that, they do exactly what they're supposed to do. Perfect. Rick says, I had the Nios 160 and it had the restart issue previously described. I called Ecotech. They sent a new pump and no restart issues anymore. CT says, what's that huge coral on your right? That one. Down. I can't bend my arm like that. Right there. That is a tongue coral from Australia. And when I got it, it was probably about this big. And now it's about that big. From time to time, when I'm working the tank, I have to move it out of my way. And I would take this coral out of the water and set it like in a big pie pan or something. And it won't even fit in the pan. It's like at an angle. And the longer I leave it in that pan, you can see the skin is like stretching down with all the water weight. You know, initially you pick it up, you're like picking up a sand dollar. It's all one piece. But as it sits there, it just hangs. It really needs to be removed from the tank and put in something where it can sit and just be submerged. And I didn't do it on purpose. I just noticed it was doing that. And it was like, I need to hurry up and get this back in the water before it tears the skin. But I've had it for a really long time. It's a slow grower, but I really like it. And it's got these really pretty green tentacles. Yeah, if it's dinoflagellates, you need to join that group. They're going to tell you exactly what to do, and hopefully you'll get this thing behind you. It is not a pleasant process to deal with, and it's going to take some effort. Speaking of BTAs, Reef With Me says, any update on your cube? I haven't done an update on that yet because I haven't done anything yet. I'm trying to get the building done. I'm trying to take care of orders and the building. That's all I care about. And so the clowns and anemones are still in their temporary tank behind this reef, and they seem to be doing fine. I mean, there's been no change, and the tank has been sitting in my back room waiting for me to build the stand and the canopy. So as soon as I can get that building done, then I feel like I'll be working on the stand and canopy, so I can get that. And I got to decide what color to cover it. You know, I don't think I want to stain it. I think I want to paint it. I think I want to paint it white. I just don't know if I want it white, but I kind of think white is the way to go. So I have that in the near future. Will it happen by the end of May? Maybe. Don't know. Maybe. Ollie says, I have some blue clove polyps that have appeared on the base of an acrofrag and have grown onto my rockwork. I've seen mixed info. Are they a problem or not? They're a problem. I mean, they're pretty, and if you like them, enjoy, but they are super invasive, and they can grow and cover a lot. But if you could like isolate them on a little island, a little rock out there in the middle of the sand bed, you could say, look at these beautiful little blue cloves. It's so nice. Just don't let them touch all the rest of your reef because they will just migrate across like zinnia does, like green star polyps do, like mushrooms do. So you want to kind of keep them under control. Adam says, any obscure gotchas I should be aware of when running Kalkwasser concurrently with a calcium reactor? For instance, kalkwasser binds to phosphates, so I should keep an eye on my phosphates dropping too low. One of the things that you're going to want to keep a close eye on are all of your pumps that have magnets in them, because they will calcify from the kalkwasser, and you'll have to clean them more frequently because it messes them up. So that's kind of an important thing. I don't know if you'll have that problem with, like, if you run Vortex. I have no idea because I haven't run kalkwasser in forever. But I do know Protien skimmers and return pumps suffer from kalkwasser, and they have to have their pumps taken apart more frequently to clean them. Also, set some kind of an alarm on your system to let you know when the pH is getting too high, because if your kalkwasser is somehow overdosing, you want to be told as quickly as possible to stop crashing the tank, because kalkwasser has a pH of 12, and once your pH is over 8.5, you should be getting alerts and emails and red lights flashing on your tank, and your tank will be turning more and more white rapidly because it's dosing and dosing and dosing. So be careful with the stuff. Estonian Reefer says, how long do you expect your glass aquarium seams to last on average? Any signs to look out for before a disaster? Great question. What I always do is I clean my tank. I get on the top of my walkboard here and I clean the top glass, the rim that keeps it together. I look at all the seams constantly. I'm always looking at the vertical seams. I want to see what they look like. I want to make sure there's not air bubbles happening in there or any kind of deterioration. You can even press on the glass and see if the silicone is holding tight. I had a tank that was just shy of 6 years old that started dripping from the top left corner. And when I pushed on the seam, I could see it look perfect. But when I let go, whatever was happening got even worse. And I was like, oh my God. And so I immediately went to Home Depot and I got giant clamps and I put a hole right through the wall. And I put the clamp right through the hole and then put the other end on it, and I squeezed the tank together, and I called my friends and said, we got to drain the tank tomorrow. I need you to help me move all this livestock. And they came over and helped me, which was really nice. But if you're wondering how long your tank can last, it's a crapshoot. The last version of the 400-gallon behind me, it was 13 months old when it sprung a leak, and I had to drain the tank immediately. This tank right now is the replacement, and I've had it for 8.5 years. I was just noticing a post by my friend Brad, who's up in Utah, and he had a tank from a different manufacturer, and his also coincidentally leaked at 13 months. It was a weird one, 13 or 15. I think he said 13. I read it yesterday. And I remember he had this beautiful Reef, and it was just so sad because it was doing so well, and he had to break it down immediately, and it was down in the basement. It was really hard to get the tank down there in the first place, and now he had to deal with replacing it with another tank and taking his livestock and putting it somewhere to keep it safe while this transition was happening. It was a whole thing. So how long can they last? I don't know. There's always that guy out there that says, I've had this tank, it's an oceanic, it's 30 years old, it's built like a tank. I'm like, yeah, I understand that. I get it. They last forever. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. I just think that silicone and glass is black magic. And I don't know why, but that doesn't mean I won't use a glass tank with silicone. I totally do. My new cube for the anemones is another glass tank with Starfire glass with black silicone. It'll match this tank. And that one was made by Planet Aquariums. This one was made by Marineland. So there you go. Just got to keep an eye on everything and just look for flaws. And if you see something, just really look. And if it's an acrylic tank, you can tell how the seam is doing, because if it turns cloudy, if there's a lot of cracks in it, if there's gaps, air bubbles happening, it's another tank that's about to blow. And so you'd want to, and I've visited a guy in Arizona once, and his beautiful Reef, and it was a big long tank, 7-8 feet long, and right there in the middle of the bottom, when two seams are bonded together, it's like all one continuous color. But he had right in the middle of the long seam, half of the seam was white. Half of it, half the thickness. So if that was 3/8 or if it was ½ inch, it was 3/16 to ½ inch of no bond anymore. There was only 50% left of the seam to hold the water in there. I said, man, I hate to be the one to tell you this because, your tank is gorgeous, but you need to start looking for another tank. And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, have you looked at that? And he goes, well, I was wondering about that. I was like, yeah, I would definitely deal with that before it lets go. You know, I'd much rather you replace a tank that you have doubts about than wait for it to explode. And then you have to deal with the aftermath of cleaning your house, your floors, your carpet, your cabinetry, your electronics, whatever gets splashed. Plus all the livestock is at risk and you're grabbing fish off the floor or whatever. I mean, these things do happen. There's some explosive tank breaks. There's some where the seam just lets go. There's some where the bottom of the tank just shatters and all the rock comes crashing down and hits everything underneath, whatever's there. I mean, there's been all kinds of craziness over the years, and unfortunately, it's always a mess. So it'd be much better to tackle a problem before you have a big mess, get the livestock out, remove the tank in question, talk about getting it repaired, or just replace it with a new tank. Born to be a Shooter says, what's the name of the group? I think it's called Dinoflagellate Support Group. If you just type that into the search in the groups area, you'll find it. It won't be hard to find. There's like 2 if you do a search. Mike says, did you get any hats for your urchins? I got this little tiny crown, itty bitty little crown, and a friend came into town with his 2 kids, and they tried to put it on the urchin, and the urchin wasn't having it. So it's waiting for me. I will try to get this on one of my urchins at one point and get a good picture. But for now, I'm keeping it there so don't lose it. Brent, my tank is 8.5 years old right now. So, fingers crossed. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Today is Water Test Saturday. Please test your tank. We want to test nitrate, phosphate, alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, temperature, pH, salinity. We want to know potassium. We want to know everything. If you haven't done it in a long time and your tank is doing well, it wouldn't be a bad idea to do an ICP test now. That way you can kind of see where your tank is doing well, what all your numbers are. And then when things are going wrong, you can send another ICP test. You can compare the 2. I sell ICP tests from my website, and you can go ahead and get that mailed off and get some answers. I'll tell you a quick little thing that Dwayne encountered. Dwayne is my friend who helped me with my tank reset last year. And he has a calcium reactor like I do. And he said when he opened the lid, the smell of sulfur was incredible. And he couldn't understand why he was losing corals in his tank. And so he sent off an ICP test. Well, he's waiting for the results. They still haven't arrived yet. But he cleaned out the calcium reactor, put in new media, turned it back on, and immediately his tank started looking better because he wasn't dosing sulfur into his reef. So it's one of those weird ones that I've not heard before. And I know Sanjay's dealing with some problems with his 500-gallon reef, and I'm wondering if he has a calcium reactor. Now, myself, I have a calcium reactor. I've had one since 2004, which means it's 18 years old. And I just put more media in mine, and I changed out those thumb screws to those nice little easy release latches from Slide Lock. And I will definitely be keeping an eye on mine to make sure I don't have sulfur happening in my reactor. But usually what would happen to cause that would be a lack of circulation. The calcium reactor is a tube with a pump on the side, and it does this all the time. It circulates. But as the media turns to mud, water doesn't move through it as quickly, and it can actually, the pH can get too low in there. It can become sulfuric. Even with a pH probe in there to measure, that's still not an accurate reading because Dwayne has all that, and he's still discovered this. And he's been doing this for a super long time, and I have a feeling this is the first time it's ever happened to him. So just because you know your system, just because you have the same equipment, just because you've always done it a certain way, doesn't mean Murphy isn't looking for another way to kill your reef. So we want to keep an eye out for all those little weird things. And that's why I share these stories with you, so you can like, oh yeah, Mark mentioned that happened to one guy one time in the history of mankind. So we want to make sure that we don't have anything that's going sour, that is that hasn't had water circulating through it. Let's say you have a reactor, you're running carbon, biopellets, GFO, and you decided to close the valve and stop the flow because you don't need it temporarily. If you do that, you need to drain the liquid out of it and then refill it with water and turn it on. Don't just reopen it and let the stagnant water in your reactor back into your tank because it'll hurt your tank. And it could be off for a few hours, a few days, a few weeks. Any of that would be bad. Water should be moving through reactors all the time. So if you are in the habit of turning some off and then turning them back on, be aware that there's a chance you could be adding issues to your tank that shouldn't be happening. We want all water moving all the time. All right, thank you so much for tuning in with me this week. I will see you guys